Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, this year is the 95th anniversary of the Great Flood of 1927, which caused much of the state to be submerged. Now the concern is not high waters, but the river being too low. We'll examine the prognosis and possible impacts. In politics, there have been floods of numbers lately from polling the upcoming elections and in counting the mayoral recall petition. Elsewhere, we will hear how homecoming weekend at Southern University was a mixture of tragedy and triumph. We'll also look at the changing, though still spooky, face of Halloween. And on a personal note, one of our panelists announced this week that he is leaving his job, not to retire, but for a dramatic change in careers, and he'll tell us why. Joining us are tonight's Informed Sources, Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Will Sutton, columnist, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate, David Bernard, chief meteorologist, WVUE-TV, Fox 8, and Tyler Bridges, staff writer, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. And we are going to go on over to David right now. The river is low. I mean, lower than many people can ever remember seeing it, strikingly low. That's a problem, but we need something to fill it up. So meteorologists, when are we getting rain?
Well, it's interesting, first of all, that you say how strikingly low it is, because it's not unprecedented. In fact, what we're seeing this year, I checked yesterday at the Carrollton gauge, it's around 2 feet right now. We have been a lot lower than that before, but what I think is really amazing right now is what's going on upriver around Greenville, Mississippi, Memphis, Tennessee, Arkansas, Missouri. All-time lows for the river are being set. Some of these records, like the one at Memphis, the last time the river was that low, the previous record was 1988. And that year is significant because that was a major La Nina. And that's what we're in now. When I go back and look at some of the historical low points in the river, they tend to line up with this La Nina that tends to recur more often than not. The last 30 or 40 years, we've had more La Ninas than El Ninos. You hear me talk about that with hurricane season a lot, right. But it has a big impact, not just on hurricane season, but also the climate for the United States.
And of course, you know, a lot of the country is in drought. And we haven't had any real substantial rainfall in a while now. Now, October is oftentimes a dry month. But this is the fact that we're not having this rainfall, is this what is impacting the Mississippi River?
Now, the rainfall that we get here, that doesn't have anything to do with what the river levels are. It's all about what happens upriver. Right. And the drought is getting much worse in the heartland, the upper Mississippi River Valley. And because of that, we're not getting any flow farther down the river. I found this fact to be pretty amazing. About 1/3 of all the rain that falls across the United States feeds into the Mississippi River. So that's a big deal, and we're not seeing that. And we may not for some time. Everything I'm seeing looks dry. It may not be till later in the winter. If they start to get more snow in the upper Midwest, we could see things turn around by the spring.
So what is this going to do for shipping, for all the barges and also the freight ships? The freight ships can't go beyond Baton Rouge anyway, but they're going to have a problem. And then what's going to happen to the transportation on the river?
There already is a major problem, and that could have economic ramifications for our country and around the globe as well. I was looking at the corn barges, for instance, coming from the upper Midwest. That's down 50%. Over what normally is carried down into the Gulf of Mexico and then out of the port. So already it's having a big impact on commerce.
You know, when people say that something wrong with the weather, they say blame the weatherman. So can we blame him?
I don't think so. David does not have to shoulder that blame.
I've been blamed for a lot worse. So
when you say that the rain here doesn't affect the river, where does that water go?
Well, I mean, of course, some of that will drain into the river, but obviously the massive amounts of water that's carried down the Mississippi, that has more to do with the major tributaries like the Missouri and the Arkansas and the Ohio rivers that all feed into the Mississippi. That's where you get a lot of the flow that comes in. And if you look at those areas like the Arkansas and the Missouri River Valley, those basins, that's where we see the drought is getting worse. In fact, the new drought monitor just came out in the last 24 hours, and it shows most of the country now is at least abnormally dry or entering a moderate drought, almost the entire country.
Does climate control, I mean, global warming, does that seem to be part of what's happening here?
I think what we're seeing right now is due to the La Nina, and that tends to happen more frequently with the long-term climate pattern that we're in. So There are some evidence that drought's going to become a little bit more pervasive due to climate change. But what we're seeing right now, we've seen repeated many times over the years. 1988, 1999, and 2012 are some of the other years that we've had the river this low. So it's happened several times in the last recent years, and that's because the La Niñas are more frequent.
And we're seeing this out west too, like the Colorado River is really low, and then that provides electricity. I mean for the West Coast.
That's a big problem, right? If you've been reading about the Colorado River, because so many of the western states rely on that, including California. So there's, in the future, there may be water wars going on out there. There's already a lot of litigation between states fighting over water rights, even like Georgia and Florida had one recently. So it is a problem.
Is this a temporary thing and one day it's going to all get better, or is there a possibility that this is the future?
I think it will get better, and I think, like most problems, they're multifaceted. It's like we've got the problem with the climate and the more frequent droughts going on, but we also have to take a look at how we're using our land agriculturally, how we're developing our land out to the west where people are living where they didn't live before. And the Southwest and the West are known to have significant climate swings like this. Everywhere from California to Texas, drought to wet and back to drought is kind of a common theme for those states.
Okay, so we've seen it occur before, and it's sort of part of cycle, but it is a problem right now, and it's sort of jarring to see, for example, in Baton Rouge, the USS Kidd not in the water at all. People are walking underneath that battleship.
And it's hard to believe, because you think back just a couple of years ago when we had the extremely high levels on the Mississippi River, unusually high in the summertime, and we were worried about storm surges up the river and the levees.
Right. It just really is an incredible thing. All right, David, thanks a lot. We're going to go over to Tyler right now. Elections coming up, congressional seats, and also for a state Senate seat here in the New Orleans area.
Yeah, Marcia, we do have a hot state Senate race going on in New Orleans between two Democratic state representatives. It's the most liberal state Senate district in the state. Royce Duplessis against Mandy Landry to replace Karen Carter Peterson, who retired, she resigned from the Senate. And the two candidates, Landry and Duplessis, have very similar voting records. But Royce Duplessis is trying to create some separation from Mandy Landry. He's got a new TV ad out that's going after Landry for an obscure vote that she took on the redistricting during February, and it can be a bit of a hot topic because it also involves race and abortion.
And then we're looking at congressional races too across the state. So how are those looking?
Right. In that redistricting session earlier this year, the legislature drew the lines to protect the incumbents. So Troy Carter in New Orleans will win easily. Steve Scalise, who represents suburban New Orleans, he'll win easily as well. And that will be the case of all of the congressional candidates. Now, we also have a U.S. Senate race going on. John Kennedy is seeking a second term in the Senate. He's a Republican, as you know. And there are three major Democrats challenging him: Luke Mixon, Gary Chambers Jr., and Sarita Steeb. The national handicappers expect that Kennedy will win that election in the primary, but we don't know yet.
But Kennedy has come out with an ad attacking...
He's begun to attack Luke Mixon, who is a former fighter pilot, and this maybe is a sign that Luke Mixon is representing something of a threat for Kennedy to win outright in the November 8th primary.
You have these national elections. Some states are swing states. They could either go Democrat or Republican. Louisiana has never been much of a swing state. I mean, there was a time when it was all Democrat, and then after a while the conservative Democrats became Republican, so it became mostly Republican on the vote. And so we're not that kind of state. We're other kind of states. It could go any way. So the politics, it's not as good of a spectator sport for those elections as it is in other places.
No, Errol, you're absolutely right. Perhaps the most interesting congressional race is in Acadiana, where Clay Higgins, who's a fervid Trumper, is running for re-election, and another Republican who's not as far to the right is challenging him, and that's maybe really the only congressional race where an incumbent might lose.
Election day, November 8th, right?
Yeah, and early voting has already started, and I hope people get out and vote for whoever they want to support.
Real quick, touch on James Carville. You did a piece that's in the paper this morning about him and his
Yeah,
future.
yeah. I went out to Carville, Louisiana, where James Carville is from, Iberville Parish near St. Gabriel, and he showed me around the community he grew up in. He also took me to what was the National Leprosarium, I think as I'm pronouncing that correctly, where lepers were held. That's what they used to be called. Now that they're recognized as people suffering from Hansen's disease. But it was a kind of a walk down memory lane for him, and I took that as an occasion, since this is an election time, and that's when James Carville shines, to write a profile about him.
And he's still in it, doing it. No, not thinking about retiring at all.
Yeah, he's lost a step, to use sort of an athletic phrase, but he's still really just slinging out those phrases, as I wrote about in the article.
And he's always an interesting one to listen to. All right, thanks a lot, Tyler.
And he's a guy who really loves New Orleans, and now that he's living here full time.
Right, he and his family. Okay, thanks a lot, Tyler. Okay, we're going to go over to Will right now, and Will is joining us from northern Louisiana right now, and we're going to talk about, you wrote a piece about HBCUs celebrating homecoming over this past week, specifically what Southern University experienced.
Right. October is a really big month for historically Black college and university homecomings. There were quite a number the first week, the second weekend, last weekend, and that included Southern University in Baton Rouge. Unfortunately, early in the morning on that Friday, there was a shooting and there were 11 people wounded. Fortunately, no one died and no one was critically wounded and with life-threatening injuries. That's good news because we hate to see any kind of activity like that. But one of the good things that I noted in the column that I wrote is that the Southern University community and the Baton Rouge community really came together to identify what had happened, who was involved, resulting in the arrest of two of their accomplices on Friday, hours after the incident, and by the close of the weekend, the shooter as well. So there was a wonderful weekend of great joy and happiness, a sad, unfortunate incident, but the community really came together to anonymously help with pictures and videos and calls and text. And they really helped the police bring it not to a conclusion, but to the point of arrest as the homecoming weekend went on.
And that's a point that you bring out, in your piece, is that homecoming is held to bring people together who've been together years past. They come together again as a community. The Southern University community really did come together to help the authorities solve this, or begin to solve it at any rate.
They did. When I talked to the police, they were very encouraged with how quickly. I mean, we're talking about within a matter of minutes, an hour or so, that people started sharing information that allowed them to track down the perpetrators and get those young people arrested. Young people who have no connection to Southern University, by the way. They're not students there, and they were, essentially outsiders who were attending a fraternity party off campus. Right. So the incident did not happen on Southern University's campus.
And so, E, did you have something?
Yeah, thinking, well, when I read your piece, I got to thinking about that. Louisiana has 4 historically Black public colleges with Southern and Southern University and Grambling and one other.
Suno.
What?
Oh,
okay.
Suno in New Orleans, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. In Southern New Orleans, and plus there's 2 private schools with Dillard and Xavier. Is that good for a state the size of Louisiana?
Well, there's also Southern University in Shreveport, and there's also the Southern University Law Center in Baton Rouge. And for a state our size, that's reasonable. A lot of what has happened historically in states with historically Black colleges and universities depends on the state's positions with public education, the state position with land-grant institution, which are not all historically Black, and quite a number of private HBCUs that popped up based on faith and religious backgrounds. So there are states like Georgia and North Carolina that have more HBCUs than we have. But of course, we have a number of other institutions, and these days there are more open access to admissions and enrollment opportunities for Black people and others. I would say that historically Black colleges and universities in a number of places, including Louisiana, have a number of non-Black students, particularly in athletics and in the sciences. It's not unusual to go to a HBCU homecoming and you might see a white guy doing the stomp with some Black fraternity because he actually is a member of that organization.
That's great. All right, Will, thanks so much. We're going to move on over to E now, and you wanted to talk about some changes for Halloween.
Well, I was thinking that New Orleans, we celebrate two events which are the day before a solemn church-related event centered around death. Okay, the first and most famous, I guess, is Ash Wednesday, and the day before that is Mardi Gras, which is like sold as the last day of celebrating before the solemn season of Lent. And then Halloween is more universal, but it's the same sort of thing that you have All Saints Day, which is to honor the dead, and Halloween has become like the day of celebration for that too. So the celebration and death thing is something that we see as common. What I'm noticing in New Orleans, though, is, I mean, it's always been Halloween celebration, but you're starting to see new influences. One, the Mardi Gras influence has always been there. You know, we're just good at masking, but like when the Crew of Boo started, which borrows from it. And I remember when Blaine Kern started it, he was talking about it, and he says, "Oh, this is going to be great." And I said, "But Blaine, this could just be a knockoff of Mardi Gras." I said, "Oh, no. It's like, well, it is a knockoff of Mardi Gras, but it's a useful knockoff." And we saw it last year. Remember the Crew of Boo that was used to measure how COVID was going, okay? If people getting rid of COVID, based on deciding whether or not they had the carnival parades. And so that Crew of Boo parade was very important last year. The other thing you're seeing is that on the Today Show this morning, they had a house from Memphis Street in Lakeview that was, the front was decorated, and that borrowed from the whole float decorating thing a few years ago. And so I think the float decorating thing convinced people, hey, let's do it at other times too. And so those are new. And also I think you see more emphasis on the Day of the Dead celebration, which is the same time as All Saints Day. I think Sally Glassman at the Healing Center had a lot to do with that too. So we're seeing more and more embellishments.
Also, you know, we're seeing crowds gather around the Burger House on St. Charles Avenue.
The Burger House,
it's called the Skeleton House. It sort of, you know, brings back memories of the Centenny House from decades ago for Christmas.
Yeah. Well, Wellenberg has always done some great things.
Great job. Really clever. All right, E, thanks a lot. Tyler, over to you. There's a recall going on for the mayor of New Orleans. Tell us about it.
Sure, it's been going on for a while now, Marcia. It's an effort that really hasn't succeeded in Louisiana at this scale to get enough signatures to have a recall election. But the people behind it are trying to get something like 55,000 signatures by about Mardi Gras. And they are holding 2 or 3 events in different parts of the city. I actually stopped by one today at the corner of Marconi and Navarre. And the biggest challenge, Marcia, that they face is, you know, there's a lot of people will sign this petition right at the beginning because they're upset with the mayor. But the big question is, can they keep the momentum going? You know, can they sustain it? So I asked the guy who was behind the petition drive, the one I stopped at today, and he said that they're counting on Mayor Cantrell to continue to fumble and say things that will inflame people to want to sign the petition drive.
And so far, how many signatures?
Well, they're not saying, but my sources tell me it's something like 30,000, which is it's a good number. But again, the question is, can they sustain that momentum to get all the way to what they need to get to?
And those need to be verified. So are they being verified while they're being collected, while people are writing their names? Yeah,
this is a big advance in the signature gathering process. Traditionally, people would, you know, you'd say, hey, are you registered to vote in Orleans Parish? The person said, yeah, and they'd sign their name, and maybe they were, maybe they weren't. Now, the person who goes up to sign the petition the petition organizers have a QR code that they can go check then on the Secretary of State's webpage to see whether the person is actually registered to vote in Orleans Parish, because only the people signing have to be registered voters. So the chances of unverified, incorrect signatures, those numbers go down significantly.
Because that's still a big part of the process in the end. Everything needs to be verified by
the Secretary of State's office. But again, the incorrect signatures, those go down substantially thanks to this new technology.
Okay, so it continues. They have until Ash Wednesday to get all these signatures collected.
Yes, it all comes back, right, Errol?
Right.
Ash Wednesday, Day of the Dead, Halloween.
It sure does. Okay, we're going over to David now. Mixed emotions. Say it isn't so, but I'm happy for you.
Well, thank you. You're talking about leaving TV, right?
I'm talking about leaving TV.
Well, it was a decision that was kind of a long time coming. This is my 30th year as a broadcast meteorologist, and I'd been thinking about this for a number of years about what do I want to do for the next 20, 25 years, and I wasn't convinced it was going to be TV. And one thing I'd always been interested in is mental health and helping out people in that way. And you were saying, Marcia, earlier, it's like a huge shift for me, but it's really not. That's not the way I look at it. I feel like I've always been helping people, maybe on a big scale. When you talk about TV, this is just going to be on a more intimate level as a therapist, and I hope to make a contribution. There's a great need for it, not only in our community, but all across the country.
So you've been going to Tulane and studying social studies?
I am. I'm in the School of Social Work, getting my graduate degree. I'm taking 12 hours of graduate courses right now, and I was still doing part-time work at the station 4 days a week. And I was telling you guys earlier, the only reason I agreed to do that is because I knew there wouldn't be a hurricane this year. So, and I was right. So,
I wish you had told me that in August 1st and said, don't worry, Marcy, because I worry so much.
well, I'd never like to say never for sure. So, and who knows, maybe I'll be back on TV again one day. I'm already on it again right now.
Look at you right
So
now.
there's all kinds of ways to help people. What's your specialty going to be?
It's way too early to say, Errol. I am just getting started, and I'm a novice, and I don't really know yet. I don't really know. We'll find out.
And so the program that you're in, how long does it take?
It's a 16-month accelerated master's program, so it's going to be fast. I had this semester, and then I go all through next year, spring, summer, fall, and next December, I'll be graduated.
That's a lot of intensive work. Go ahead, Edie.
When Lee Zurich interviewed you the other night on Channel 8, you also mentioned that during this period you had a health problem. Did that affect your thinking? Or
It did contribute to it. Yes, I talked about I had toxoplasmosis. And it's a very long story, but the bottom line is it caused some very severe neuropathy that I experienced for most of 2020 and a good part of 2021. Thankfully, that's mostly resolved now, just very minor. But that was very taxing, that was very stressful, and that did factor into it as well. My husband and I would like to do some additional traveling, and the TV business is the TV business, right? Yeah. And hurricane season is hurricane season, and there's not a lot of wiggle room there, right? So part of this is also me being able to have a little more flexibility in my personal life.
And TV business doesn't really give you that flexibility. I mean, there are really restrictions on when you can take time, and if a hurricane comes, you're there,
And that's
we're
great.
Looking at you.
I accept that as part of the job. And for 30 years, I've done a really good job at it, as good as I could. And but now I think I owe it to myself and him and the rest of my family to try something different. But at the same time, I get to still help people, and that's great.
Is it hard to go back and study?
It hasn't been as hard as I thought. I will be honest that when Tulane sent down the syllabus, like the week before school, about 11 o'clock at night, I was up there looking at the computer and I saw this come in. It was paper, 15 chapters, midterms, and I did get some anxiety, but I think I've settled into it okay.
And so you started what year and where in meteorology? In
1992 in Corpus Christi, Texas.
Oh boy, it has been a good run for you, David, because you also went to Miami for a while. You'd worked in this market, went to Miami, then came back.
That's right.
And you are much beloved in this community, and I know so many of us have really depended upon you because we knew we could.
Well, I appreciate that, and I take that very seriously, and I want everybody to know I plan to be here in New Orleans. So, if you see me around on the street, as I say, you can still ask me about the weather. I'm sure I'm going to know what's going on, and I might be involved in meteorology in some aspect of my life as well going forward. So stay tuned. As they say.
How has the the technology of weather forecasting improved during your time?
Oh, night and day. I mean, when I first got into meteorology and into the TV business, the internet was just basically, it was very embryonic, but it was on its way. And the amount of information, just like any profession these days, is just voluminous compared to what it used to be. It's pretty incredible, the strides that have been made. Big difference between now and 30 years ago.
And so you are on with WVUE. When is your last appearance there?
November 17th.
Okay.
So I got a
not-
couple more weeks ahead.
Yeah.
November 17th, that will be my last show. Yes.
All right, we'll be watching, and you're leaving your weather department in good hands too.
Oh, great hands.
Absolutely,
We've
yeah.
got great staff there. Bruce Katz, of course, is taking over as chief meteorologist. Zach Fradella, our morning show. He's one of the most talented forecasters I've ever worked
He's
with.
great. He's great.
Nakandra is always a great calming presence, and everybody knows her. And our new meteorologist, Hannah Gard, she is one of the brightest hires I've ever made. And so she's new to New Orleans. If you see her, she's on the weekend mornings, and she's making some great contributions.
Well, David, thank you for everything, and best of luck.
Thank you.
All right, time for other stories. E.
Jerry Lee Lewis died today. He died at 87. An interesting story about him, Jim Brown, who's a former Secretary of State and Insurance Commissioner, was from Faraday, and so was Jerry Lee Lewis. And Brown tells the story that his first day as a lawyer, right out of law school, he rented a storefront on Main Street, didn't have his secretary, just sitting at the desk. First customer was Jerry Lee Lewis, who walked in, and so he represented him. But Lewis couldn't pay cash, and so he paid off with tickets for a while. But it was the beginning of a relationship.
Jerry Lee Lewis, what a character, what a musician, and great balls of fire, right?
great balls
We all
of
know
fire,
that.
yeah.
Will, over to you.
Southern University is the only historically black college university system, and they've had a museum in Baton Rouge. 2002, they opened one in Shreveport, and just now one has opened up in New Orleans. So I was there for the opening on Thursday. It's a wonderful 15,000 square feet of curated space with African and African American art exhibits, 4 galleries.
Okay.
It's over there on Press Drive, Punch Train Park, and I encourage people to go and take a look at this special gem.
All right, thanks a lot, Will. Real quick, David.
Hurricane season's just about over. We have just a few weeks to go, and there's really no record of a storm in November this far west in the Gulf, so we're looking good.
Oh, thank goodness. Tyler?
Yeah, so I cover politics, but I got a new book called 5 Laterals and a Trombone, the wildest finish in college football history, and I'm doing a book signing on it at 7 p.m. Thursday night at Octavia Books. Hoping to see people there. It's the ending was so wild, people didn't even know who had won the game.
That is, I can't wait to read the book. Great writer that you are. All right, guys, thanks so much for being here. Thank you all for joining us, too. See you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.